following on from last week, Genesis 1:1, we opened it up, we saw the glory of God as creator, we saw the philosophical reasons of the power of the text, how it dismantles all other major philosophies that I could think of at the time, and how he's coded it, how he structured that text, and how it's basically the most important text in the entire scripture, because without a creator God it all falls apart, everything. So that was great. And we looked at some science, not because we needed to look at science to prove the Bible, but it helps to confirm things with other people and just to tell them, look, it is in line with current science and so on. So we did that. One of the most important things being that the anthropic principle, this idea that there are a number of constants, physics and chemistry, that are in our environment, out in the cosmos, in the solar system, upon the earth itself, when we look at these constants that are so finely tuned, in order to have life of any form, we would need like a fruit machine. You would go and have a fruit machine, and every single clicking thing on it has got like 1,000 possibilities of it, and it's going for thousands and thousands of rows, and we've got to pull it once, and the jackpot's got to get every one of these coming up. And of course this is turning many atheistic scientists to God, the anthropic principle. In fact, one of the people who coined the term as an atheist and who was studying this eventually became a Christian from his atheistic examination of the anthropic principle. It's very, very powerful. But the thing is, that's still not really okay. You get somebody in the street, or your family or your friends, and you go, okay, do you know about Genesis 1:1? There's a sort of a vacant stare comes over it, and well, you're a biblical bigot, and what the hell are you talking about? So look, let's just accept something. You're a Christian and I'm an atheist, let's have a cup of tea and forget it. And the reason for that, of course, is they're coming from a worldview that has been imprinted on them, maybe from quite early childhood, if they've been through state schooling these modern days, but certainly into university, the brighter ones will have been groomed with the worldview of materialism, atheistic materialism. Nobody's going to tell them that's what they're doing to them, but it's what they do to them. And they come out, and many, many Christian children, there's many studies showing it, of the amount of Christian children that go into university as a Christian and walk out, go back home and say, I've become an atheist. And so part of this that I want to just express this morning is not to get on anybody's case. If you're an atheist listening to my words right now, I'm not trying to get on someone's case. I'm not trying to pick on people. But I do think we need to do a critique of why so many students become atheists. And let's have a look if the reasons that they go this way are valid, in fact. And what I'm telling you is, it is my opinion from the studies that I have done, and many others, that evolution, in the sense of from goo through the zoo to you, that type of evolution, let's call it macroevolution, as opposed to microevolution, which would be the strongest and the fittest survive, which we agree with. Natural selection for the fittest survival of plants, animals, and so on. There's nothing wrong with it. It is totally scientific, and it's provable. It's testable, provable, real science. But when we get to this macroevolution, I'm suggesting to you people, it is totally, not slightly, totally unprovable and untestable, and therefore is not science. It is materialism. Well, I'll put it another way. It's science that's cloaked, it's over the cloak of what it really is. Materialism, a philosophy of there is no God. And evolution is the cloak that's put over it and called science. And so we've been conditioned to, just as in centuries gone by, people were conditioned, if the priest says it, it's got to be true. Even today, some people are like that. They just follow blindly, and we have this people following. If you're a scientist, you've got a PhD, and you say something, and we can find 3 other PhDs who agree with you, it must be true. And it's taken as gospel. Let's expose if this is true. Why do our students become atheists? So, I'm making the point again. Our authority and evidence, although I'm going to talk about science, it's still Scripture. I don't care if your science agrees with my Scripture. I'm believing it because of the Scripture, not the science. I don't care if your science disagrees with Scripture. I'm believing the Scripture, not the science. It is convenient when we assess the science and it seems to align with Scripture. That's great. But just never forget when I'm saying these things, I'm not arguing our case from science. I'm merely making observations about science. There's no real disconnect between true science and true Scripture. This is another falsehood that's propagated by certain people in the atheistic community, and it's over and over and over again. It is repeated as a mantra. And if you were to really think about this philosophically and carefully, you would realize this mantra is a lie. It's creating a war that doesn't exist. There will be no real disconnect between true science and true Scripture from a Christian point of view. We are against the ideas in non-biblical worldviews. We're not against the people. So I just want to be clear on that. I do say a lot about Dawkins and others, Sam Bennett and others, but I'm not against them. In fact, sometimes I pray for them. I'm not against them. I'm against what they say, and I'm against how they influence our youth. That I am against. So today I've got to pick up a few points. And I'm putting a reading list at the end on a slide, and you can look at that if you want to follow up in more detail. Proverbs 18:7, the first to plead his case seems right until someone comes and you examine him. So, okay, these guys have made their case about macroevolution. I'm the guy coming along to give you an examination of that case, or at least to attempt it. So a few definitions. An agnostic is someone who basically says you can't know or not know whether there is or isn't a God or gods. Okay, that's just for understanding as we use words later on. An atheist disbelieves in deities of any type, but he's not actively against you. And you'd be surprised, because you get so much noise from the people that are attacking Christians, you begin to end up thinking all scientists are like that. It is not correct. There is a small minority, very powerful, very influential, and if you go to the internet, they're flocking, swearing, cursing, slandering people that are following them on the internet. If you ever get in any discussions with them, they are still the minority. They are not the majority, actually. An anti-theist is where we would put someone like a Professor Richard Dawkins, who I mentioned because he's one of the most popular anti-God people coming from the issue of evolution and materialism. He's the most well-known on the planet at the moment. But they believe that theism and religion are actually harmful. And that even if beliefs in the deity were true, they would still be undesirable and they should be discarded from society. They're utter hypocrites with this. Utter, I can't go down the road. I wish, so many of the things I want to stop and just say, this is nonsense. But if for yourself, religion is harmful. Yes, look at the Crusades, look at this, look at that. Okay, go count up the number of the people killed in the Crusades. It's simple to do. Then just go and count up all the people who are killed, murdered, raped, tortured, stolen from, beaten up, and all those activities have nothing to do with religion. And if you just take the one issue of being killed, you will find that it's in an order of hundreds of times more people are killed outside religion than they're ever killed inside religion. It's just nonsense, and so on. So we could go, but No, you need to get the facts. They are outspoken against theistic beliefs. They mock them. They think religion is just, it's a crutch that you get on because you can't be bothered to think. And especially, and of course, never forget this, listen to me now, they're not concerned actually so much about having a God. What the concern is, the biblical God. The biblical God worries them because it's a coherent, they recognize it. It is the only religion that gives a coherent view that could upset them and bring, as it has done through history since the Bible came about, bring billions into belief. It's the Bible that they are against in the West at this time. And so they typically believe that secular humanism, you're looking at man being the important thing, he can be his own God, he's basically good. Again, where they get this data from, I have no idea. I have no idea in history where they had this, evaluation scientifically and you found out men are basically good. Whatever. And rationalism, this infers that they believe in rationalism and you don't. So they believe in rationalism is really a philosophy of thinking clearly, of logic, valuing logic and so on. And they put themselves up on quite an arrogant pedestal where they are rational, and if you disagree with them, therefore you are irrational. And then science, they've grabbed science as if it is theirs, even though the Christians actually were the ones that motivated the push of science in the West through Sir Isaac Newton and many other great men who were the founders of Western science. They were Christians. We're now getting a message that if you're a Christian, you can't do science. And even if you've got PhDs, you can't do science because your religion's getting in the way. And yet, the arrogance here, they are actually building their science on the Christians who gave them the science in the first place. And the universities, where did they come from? Christians. Christians founded Yale. Christians founded Oxford, Cambridge. Originally, you go back in the history, it was Christians that were looking for knowledge. It was Christians that were liberating people. And notice it wasn't Christians who stopped them speaking and developing their theories of materialism. We don't hear of any witch hunts, and we've been going around for 150 years trying to lock them up. No, we've allowed the freedom of thought, which they are now coming back and acting as though we are blocking thought, and we are hindrances to thought and free thought. Twisting history. So that's the sort of background. The anti-theist is really the one that is the reason that your children can go to a state school or a university and come out with atheistic thinking. It is their push over quite a period of time, over 100 years. So science then, the system of acquiring knowledge through the use of the scientific method. You generate hypotheses of what should happen. If I put my hands in the water and it looks like there's bubbles coming out of it, I'm probably going to burn my fingers. Yes, that's correct, that theory is correct, that type of thing. And so they create from sort of something that can be tested, theories with which you then try to prove what you've tested initially. And then you examine, can I break it? Understand, please, my dear friends, no matter how many fancy words you hear about dark matter, string theory, you name it, you can go on a whole list of stuff. None of it, listen to me now, none of it is provable. It's all in the air. Brilliant men, brilliant mathematicians, brilliant philosophers, but it's all in the air. In other words, I am convinced if I got a room of some of these brightest mathematicians and philosophers and put them in a room and I said, I don't want you to come out until you give me equations which will validate a fairy with a wand who comes out of another dimension, waves a wand, and can create a horse and carriage with a pumpkin. They could do it. I'm not joking. These guys can do it. Because it's maths. They're just conceiving of something, and then they want to describe it with formulas. They're just describing what is in their mind. That's a hell of a lot different, and they can add together They can make it add together because the maths and the formulas, oh yeah, that balances out. And then we go, well, it must be true. There is a fairy. I mean, I've got the formula. Oh yes, you're a PhD. In fact, you're one of the world's greatest mathematicians. So therefore, yeah, there must be a fairy with a pumpkin and so on. So when we go into string theory, not to mock them, I'm trying to just understand how serious this is, not mocking their intelligence or the brilliance that they have, but they are dealing with imagination, not reality, not provable at all. You must be very, very clear of this. So what does that mean? It means, my dear friend, that it's not, strictly speaking, science. If you want to talk of something that you can test, the heat of water and when it boils and so on, that's science. You can test it, you can validate it, you can check it. When someone starts writing other theories, if the maths work out and it connects with somebody else's formula and you can bolt them together and they look basically okay, suddenly it becomes a truth. No, it doesn't work like that. Not when you think about it properly. So microevolution is scientifically provable and true, as we've said. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. Natural selection is not a thing that does anything. Don't think it acts on anything. It's just a couple of words that describe what happens. We put these animals together and the biggest one eats up the lesser one. We go, that's natural selection. But there wasn't something called natural selection inside him. There's nothing. It's not a purpose, it's not a force, it's a recognition of something that occurs in the biological world, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? This is not something, we just give it a label. And this process whereby organisms better adapted to the environment tend to survive and produce more offspring, have no problem with that. Macroevolution is not scientifically proven nor true. For example, it would infer the macroevolution, non-life to life, then to primitive cells, then to fish, through into amphibians, for example, like a frog, to reptiles, to birds, to mammals, for example, apes, and then to humans. That is what macroevolution is asserting. None of that is provable. Natural selection cannot be scientifically proven to operate there, even though you will read in articles, technical articles, they're highly complex, and they keep putting in natural selection, as if it's something that will operate in here and solve this. It is not true. Not if you really sit back, think clearly. You'll find it's just hogwash. Hogwash. It's operationally untestable by science, and so it is unprovable. It has been falsely portrayed as settled science using a technique that we're going to look at this morning, disinformation. It has propagated false proofs in schools, universities, and in textbooks for many, could have put a few more manys in here, decades, with considerable assistance from today's dominant secular humanist mass media, so National Geographic, History channels and so on. They are punting the breaking down of the Bible and the raising up of this type of pseudoscience. You know, you see the images, and there's the dinosaur, and there's this bird, and artist impression, science, but it's science. And then we put someone with a credible name in front of it, and it becomes science, and the children are receiving this as science. They're receiving it as science. It's not science. It's not. Very often. So the mass media and the culture. So of course what happens today, and this is part of why I'm talking about this today, because if you want to help people, you want to help your family in that, and they've become oriented to evolution, they're not even going to listen to you unless you can do something about beginning to shift the paradigm of trust that they've imbibed. Maybe they didn't even go to university, but they've been with the TV, they've been with people, and they realize that culturally, films, media, books, the mass culture is telling them it's true. Therefore, it becomes a cultural truth, and cultural truths are one of the hardest truths to shift, even though it can be completely false. Ancestor worship. How easy is that to shift that? Not easy at all. It's very difficult. So this is the issue you're up against. So it's worldviews. Worldviews are your issue. Now you've got to realize another thing. I just want to point out a few things that most people don't really understand, so I just want to do this while we're together. There's a lot of science that's uncontested. Dawkins and someone from Creation Ministries are not fighting over the boiling temperatures of water. In other words, they're not fighting over things that are provable. They're fighting over stuff that's not provable. Dawkins isn't worried if you go, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He's not fighting over that. He's fighting over, in the beginning, God. That type of statement. And what this means, of course, is that there's an area that comes down and it broaches the two worldviews of materialism, which is the green, over on the green side, and the design, a designer, a maker, a creator in the blue side. And that materialism box is where they overlap and the war starts. It was a creator. No, it wasn't. It was natural selection. Okay, you understand? We're getting our authority primarily from the Bible, which they say is nonsense. That Bible's nonsense. It's rubbish. And you need to be talking science. But they are, unfortunately, misleading you. Because when I told you that cosmology and huge areas of science is not provable. It's based on assumptions. And therefore they have a system of faith. And they bring things in by faith, and because they're a scientist, they call it science. But really, it's scientific science stories. It's stories, and they're entitled to the story, but it's not fact. It's not science. But this is where the war is. Is everything explainable materialistically, or can it be explained with a creator and immaterial? What are the ramifications of this? Well, the reason they can happily sleep fine at night, killing hundreds of millions of babies, is because it's just evolution. And we're only one step up from an ape in their minds, understand it. Pharmaceutical. Anything wrong with you? You need a pill. Why? Because it's not intangible. Everything's driven chemically and physically. If it's chemically and physically, we need to get the pill or the operation that will play with the mind, with the brain. They don't acknowledge a mind because it's got the concept of being immaterial. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's massive ramifications to what I'm telling you. Euthanasia now happening with the aged is because of this thinking. Killing the babies because of this thinking. Lenient on crime. Nobody's actually guilty of anything anymore. It's just your environment. It's just your genes. I can't help myself. That's why it's all soft on crime and so on. So there's a whole implications to the worldviews, you understand? And they know that, and we know that, and there's a war, and there's a lot at stake in terms of the worldview that you want to live under. And it extends into a whole list of areas of science. Now, look at the atheists and the anti-theists, the agnostics and the liberal Christians, because they join in with the science people, who they mock actually. The atheists mock the liberals who want to agree with them. But there are world-renowned scientists and philosophers on this. In the beginning, Big Bang. We dispute that. We agree with a sort of a Big Bang, but not the Big Bang they're talking about. And natural selection and chance produce life? No, we don't agree with that. You see, over on the blue side, we're saying something else, a very fundamental, of course. In the beginning, designer creates all life. Now, this is what you don't know, and you need to just get a little bit sharper here, a little piece of information. You get the impression from Dawkins and others who attack us and attack us and attack us, that all the atheists agree with Dawkins, and all the real scientists agree with Dawkins, and you are just a religious nut job. It's not true. He's being pilloried by his own non-Christian scientists as an embarrassment, a philosophical embarrassment of some of the things he says, and even a science embarrassment. He is not speaking on behalf of all scientists, him and his like. Okay, it doesn't mean these are very clever men, Dawkins and others. These are not fools. We're talking about the issues where we're taking contention, not in the uncontested areas. We're talking about the contested areas of origins and so on. That we are contesting. So do we have in this camp world-renowned scientists and philosophers? Yes. Are they all Christians? Bible-thumping, fundamentalist, bigoted Christians? No. No, they're not. Many of them are up at Nobel laureate level with agnostic and atheism, and they're agreeing with the complaints we make. They're agreeing with us, you see, but we don't realize it because it's giving you the evidence again that the media and the environment, the papers are there, the recordings of different conversations and meetings that have had where 120, I think it was 120 major scientists got together. They were so angry at the anti-theist scientists with their proclamations, they wrote a paper together discounting evolution, the principles of macroevolution. In a newspaper, they paid for it themselves and they had it listed there. And it wasn't a listing of Christians. But you don't hear about that in the newspaper. You don't get it discussed because it's not the story. It's not the mass media story that is wanted. So you see there, that's the sort of a little bit more sophisticated way of looking at this than people normally do. So what I'm telling you to remember is that not everything is contested. The science overlaps primarily at the macroevolution. Where did life come from? When did it start? What caused it? Now, some twits who can't think straight and call themselves Christians, and maybe Christians, I can't tell you for sure, but they are professing Christians. There are many of them that try to say, I believe in the Bible and the fact that natural selection, God sort of kicked the universe off and then let natural selection run. I'm not going to go down there, but I will just tell you, and you can research for yourself, you can come and ask me. There is no way you can hold that position. For certain theological reasons, it is impossible to hold that position. It's either God or natural selection. It is not compromising to the anti-theists and agreeing and then trying to hold God on the side. It doesn't work. So all theists then, anti-theists, do not represent all true scientists. So you have to break it down a bit again, because PhD scientists, what sort of groupings are they in? You've got the anti-theist, he's strong and militant with materialism. You've got other atheists who don't disagree with materialism, but they don't think you should go around bashing other people and knocking other people because they have a different viewpoint. They weigh it up quite calmly and discuss it quite moderately, and they agree when things to do with evolution are wrong. They don't agree. They can be a materialist, and actually, you see, evolution doesn't prove materialism. Materialism's a philosophy. So they can hold the philosophy of materialism, but look at the science of evolution and go, that science is rubbish. And they're saying, what they're effectively saying is, I am a materialist, but I agree with you, the Christian, that this science they're giving you to prove evolution is wrong. You understand what I'm saying? So we've got people agreeing with a lot of our points that are not Christian. They're not sharing our worldview. All that they're doing is being more objective and not trying to say evolution's the proof, because they're saying it's not the proof. And there's holes in it, dramatic holes in it. The agnostic is that person who's not sure about God. He will tend to be a materialist as well, but he's light. He's not going. An agnostic already said, I don't know if there's a God and I don't know if there's not a God. So let's not fight about it. We can discuss it, but he's not going to fight about it. You understand what I'm saying? So you're getting an easier, comfortable conversation as you're coming down the line. When you get to people who talk about intelligent design, they believe in a creator and they're light, but they can even be quite strong and militant. So there's a whole variety there. If you are a biblical creationist and you understand the word, you would be strong to militant. You wouldn't be weak, ever. If you understood your Bible. That's not to say every Christian has got enough knowledge to be strong, but if you understood the word and if you'd really thought about it, you would be strong and you would be militant because you know what's at stake. And the reason the West has gone into secular humanism is because the high intelligence and dominant scientists of the day, when Darwinism stuff came out, they never got on with it. They carried on in their theology and just thought, leave it alone. And they should have put their minds on it immediately and crushed it in the beginning. Many historians say they don't know how Darwinism actually got off the ground. There were a few people trying to bring it down initially, but because there were so many scientists, materialists who were anti-Christian, anti-God, I'm not having God running my life, and they jumped onto the Darwinism and they forced it through. This is the first worldwide survey of religion and science ever on record, and you can go to the websites there and you can see this lady doing some statistics on how many science, because of course what someone like Dawkins will say is 99% of real scientists don't believe in God. It's rubbish. But you can go and get the stats. No one with an axe to grind, a specialist in sociology, is a professor, and has done the first worldwide. It's interesting because there are countries where the opposite of what Dawkins says is true, just out of interest, to show the stupidity of many things they say, because they're saying it without research, is that there are some countries where the scientists believe in God more than the general population. It's the other way around. And now Dawkins has got to say, well, all those scientists, they're just morons. But that's the majority of the scientists in Japan or wherever it might be. Okay. This is an example of what we're dealing with in terms of bias, worldview bias, not science bias. Professor Richard Lewontin, evolutionary biologist. I can only give you one. I could go on for lots of time on this. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. Because of what? Because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Moreover, that materialism as a worldview is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. What is that telling you? That's saying, from this person's perspective, that no matter how much evidence you would find in DNA, no matter how much complexity you would find, no matter how much evidence you got from the anthropic principle, none of that evidence for this man will count. We will not allow a divine foot in the door. I just want you to be aware of this. Understand this. It's not objective. So macroevolution is settled science. National Academy of Science. Look at these words where I put them in red. You've got to be alert. The scientific consensus around Darwinian evolution is overwhelming, and therefore ideas that oppose it are properly censored. That's rubbish. That's not science again. That's dictatorship. And what does it matter about consensus? I mean, if consensus was the way you work out science, how did Darwinian evolution theory even start? Because when it started, the whole of consensus was it's wrong. No, they're happy that it can be not true when it's suiting them to get to their position, and then suddenly they come in with these truths. It's not true. Cameron Smith, an anthropology professor. There is consensus among the scientific community. Darwinian evolution does occur. It's a fact, it's not a theory. It's not a fact. By the way, you don't have to be uneducated to make some of these statements. You can be actually highly educated and still make the statements. An anti-theist scientist, Dawkins, it's absolutely safe to say, if you meet someone who claims not to believe in, and he's talking macroevolution, but he's crafty, you see, they don't want to define it, because if you get him in a corner, he'll switch the word evolution to mean natural selection in the operating level. If he's in a jam, he'll say, oh, I didn't mean. But he does mean, I can assure you, I'm not putting words in his mouth. He's talking about macroevolution. And he says, well, anyone who believes in that is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. I must say, Dawkins is brilliant at making brief, witty statements. Even though I disagree with 90% of what he says it in a most beguiling way, actually. Misinformation, information that's unintentionally false. Disinformation, intentionally false. spread deliberately an act of deception to convince someone of an untruth. That's what I'm saying macroevolution is. It's deliberately confusing mix of scientific truth, so you get some truth, you get misinformation, which is where they're just making errors, and then you get the disinformation, which is the major part of the message, intended to sway the uninformed to reject the biblical design of worldview and accept the atheistic philosophy of materialism. And if you go back in certainly the last 60 years of university education, since it was taken over by left-wing Marxist professors and became dominant, this strategy has worked, without question. They've re-engineered our society by building leaders that have come out of the factory, they've gone into leadership positions, legal, political, and so on, and eventually they have taken over the society. They have switched because they are the leaders of society. So let's look at a few icons and just give this a test. Is it true that there's been some deceptions? Well, take the book, Darwin's Origin of the Species. I don't want to go down this road too far, but let me just say this. You could read the entirety of Darwin's Origin of the Species. You will find no pages that tell you anything about an origin, because he didn't know an origin. He didn't know where they came from. He thought there was a simple cell. He had no idea of its complexity. And he gave it as well, it's not a testable anything. It's just a speculation. A speculation. That's his title. We haven't even got inside it. And, oh, by the way, this is off Wikipedia today. So you can go to Wikipedia and this is what it's telling you. It's foundational of evolutionary biology. It's a body of evidence that the diversity of life was natural selection amongst animals, what we said is true? No, it's proving the diversity of life arose by common descent. So it's now saying it proves life from non-life, even though his document doesn't even address it. He doesn't even try to address it. He can't address it. He had no idea what it was doing. And now they're linking it into Darwin solved the issue with a body of evidence about the fact that we came from sludge through to people through the monkeys. You've got to bring it down to the basics of what is really in there, what's really being said. He published 6 editions of The Origin of the Species. In the final edition, he employed the word may 640 times, if 493 times, might 203 times, and so on. Probable, probably, tend, tendency, suppose, perhaps, oh, no doubt, believe, I think. Okay, hundreds and hundreds of times in this scientific document of world importance, he's using his own words to basically tell you, it might be like this, it could be like that, it probably could have been like that, and this is science? I'm just making the point to you, my dear friends, when you've got a document like that, that is not the foundation of science. What he had in there was one thing that I am very aware of, that he didn't really contribute it. He actually stole the ideas from somebody else, but not to knock him, but it is a fact. Natural selection, the real natural selection, limited to animals. Yes, he had observed that. Many people had observed that way before him. But he made that, and people leapt on the back of it to begin not to follow that, which had been spoken about many times, but he elaborated it more. They were looking at it being the answer to macroevolution. So does Darwin's document prove? I often I try to challenge people. You know, if they get into this sort of thing, I say, give me one thing other than natural selection in his document that contributed to science in any meaningful way. Tell me one thing. You can have the same challenge if you want. I'll be happy to wait. Tell me, after reading this momentous scientific book, if there is one thing you can find that contributed meaningfully to science. So, a couple of years after he had produced his book, this most famous fossil, Archaeopteryx, I think it's called, was found in Germany. Part reptile, part bird. Trouble was, Darwin himself was aware of this and put it into his later editions, and Darwin himself didn't think it was a part reptile bird. And I've got other information for you. Modern evolutionists don't think it's a reptile bird. Why am I telling you this? Because it's taught in schools. This is one of the most famous icons that kids and university kids, seeing it in a textbook, and the textbook must be true, they're opening it up and it's proof of evolution. It's used time and time again for over 100 years to suggest they'd found proof of a missing link. This actual bird discovery, it was a bird, was used as also to influence public opinion when the Scopes trial came on, where there was a debate famous debate in America between creationists and a lawyer as to whether creationism should be taught in schools or whether they should allow evolution in to be taught. And by the way, there was no bigotry from Christians. They were not denying that it could be brought in and discussed, as is done by the secular humanists now, because you can't bring creation into a school at all. It's religion. But, yeah. That's disinformation. It's not true. There's no proof at all. That was just a bird. It's even acknowledged by the majority of atheists. You've really got to go against the grain to keep arguing what even Darwin himself didn't claim. Then you've got Ernst Haeckel, 1866, a brilliant scientist. Darwin was not a bad scientist in some ways either. He just made these drawings and he published them, but the only trouble was he manufactured them. He made it look like they were actual reality, but he made the embryos. The logic was that human beings are a later descendant right from the amoeba all the way through the zoo. So when we look at a baby, we should be looking at the same form because we've all come in an evolutionary line. And so we can see it in the amoeba because the baby has to go through the other stages to become the human. They go over the ancient previous parts of the embryo and they go through the forms until out comes the human. Now you may laugh at this, you must understand, this was taught and was one of the major points of evolutionary acceptance, published textually and so on for years. And even after the frauds were discovered, this was left in the textbook for decades. That is not science. He invented it, he drew the stuff. And full credit to those scientists who discovered it and tried to raise the issue. Stephen Jay Gould, I really like him. He's an atheist, he's dead now, but highly intelligent, but always generous and objective with his statements, unlike Dawkins and co. And he's basically revered by many. So he believed in evolution. He couldn't prove it though. And he acknowledged he couldn't get he didn't try and make proofs where he couldn't get proofs. We should not be surprised that Haeckel's drawings entered 19th century textbooks. Okay, we're talking the 1800s textbooks. But we do, I think, have the right to be both astonished and ashamed. This is for atheists, this is being written. By the century of mindless recycling that has led to the persistence of these drawings in a large number, if not a majority, of modern textbooks. Stephen Jay Gould. Dawkins is not going to call him an idiot. And he can't, because everybody knows it's a fraud and it's in the textbooks, and if you do your homework you can see it. Why is it in the textbooks? Because this issue in the textbooks is not about science. It's about conveying the worldview that they want to switch your children and the other children going into the state systems too. That's why it's there. It's disinformation, deliberate manipulation of information to achieve an end. Darwin's Tree of Life, his own diagram, I was going to put it up, but it's a bit scrappy. He did it with pencil, but it was just showing this concept. You get a period of time, you start with the first living cells, and suddenly this tree comes up, and branches come off the core of the tree. This is the key thing, the core of the tree. This total concept has been shown to be absolutely fallacious. In fact, Creation Ministries, if you go on their site, they will show you much more modern and common view now is it's an orchard. There's not a branch into one point because the DNA research doesn't support it. So you've got a tree here in the orchard, a tree there in the orchard, and so on. What are the trees? By kind. What the Bible says, he made them each in their, what we would call biblically, kinds. And there's a tree in that kind, a tree in that kind. And all the dogs come off that dog tree. Do you understand? And all the birds come off the bird tree, and so on. It goes along. Darwin's tree of life, no. By the way, this was taught. This was taught. I think it's important to understand also that an image will convince you far more. An image, you see, images stick with you. And they will convince you far more than lots of words, especially if you read them in a textbook and everybody's taking exams on it, and if you don't get the questions right, you're going to fail. So you're just being conditioned in to receiving what is fundamentally wrong. Left in way beyond when people knew this. Well, look at the new scientists. They are not Christians at all. The tree of life has turned out to be a figment of our imagination. 2009. Well, I bet you all the textbooks have been purged of that then. Really? Darwin's famous finches. You see, by the way, just as an aside, Darwin himself didn't use the finches even in the way that we're now going to allow is true. He didn't do this, but the truth is he found different beaks, and he was correct that under certain conditions the beaks could get stronger or they could get shorter to get seed, to break open, depending on the weather. It was true, it was totally true. That's natural selection and adaptation biologically to survive, right? If the bird needs a stronger beak to break open because we've got changes in the climate, then the ones with a strong beak will live and the ones with a weak beak will tend to die, and then they will multiply with each other, and hell, you end up with birds with stronger beaks. It all makes sense. Not a problem with it. We don't disagree. This was in university textbooks, not to prove Darwin's, the thing I've just told you, to prove evolution, macroevolution. Now remember, we are not geniuses. Imagine we were in a university setting and someone's giving this to us and we're sitting taking a course. We're not going to say it's wrong. Oh, I can see it's wrong. We're going to accept what we're told. And this is what happens. It's disinformation. This is one of the most famous and influential of all time. This is just an example of it, but you see this over and over again. People go into the Natural History Museum and there is the image. They've maybe even made up some models and the kids are walking through and seeing it. You've got the whole evolution story up on the walls in a museum. I mean, a museum must be scientific. It must be really on the ball. And there they are, picking up these types of images. For many decades, the idea was presented that the genetic similarity between an ape and a man was around 99%. Again, it was humbug. There are reports that pull this to pieces, but they're buried. They're not coming to... We know where the reports are. We know who's done the reports. We know who's done the studies, but they're not being brought into mainstream, because if you do that, it's going to end up with the public opinion that a man never came from an ape. Because when we say that 81 to 87% similarity between DNA, if you understood what that actually means, I can tell you the bottom line is, you will know, if you get into the depths of it, the man could never have evolved from a monkey with that degree of variation. It is impossible. Even if it was 3%, it would be impossible. Time. Because you need to get a monkey's DNA, and now it's got to switch to a human DNA. And even if you said 3%, it's impossible for the time. Their time barriers are gone. It's not 3%. We're looking at 13 or 14%. Remember, we're 50% connected to a banana with DNA. Does that mean we're a banana? I can't go down the road, but there is some fantastic developments in DNA that are beyond the wildest imaginations of Darwin or even Dawkins is coming out to show the complexity of DNA. And it is showing that God's system is of a form that you've got a program, and it's like Microsoft Office. It's not just doing Word, it's also doing Excel, it's also doing, and they're sharing subroutines. So instead of Microsoft keep writing the same software for every one of the modules, they share the modules because they all use them. DNA is like that. What they're now finding is you can't just read the DNA in a straight line to ascertain who you are, because there's a level of the DNA which is like an operating system sitting above, and that switches DNA on and off. What? How the hell? Where did it get the intelligence? Who told it to do it? Who said when that bird needs a longer beak that you're going to come down, switch something, and his beak's going to start growing? Okay. This one is very powerful. It's been taught, still can see it in some books. The evolution of the modern horse, it's been discounted. The paleontologist Niles Eldredge, he's not a Christian again, he said the textbook picture is lamentable and a classical case of paleontologic museology. Putting that in simple words, I prefer to do that. What he's saying is that museology, he's saying that this is a classical case of walking in a museum and seeing someone putting a diagram up and a few bones and putting this fanciful story in front of your eyes, and it's rubbish. For certain very technical reasons, of course. Those horses did not develop that way, and develop from one creature into another creature is nonsense. Well, we've had a look at that. The Piltdown Man was a fraud. The Whale Evolution was a fraud. Peppered Moss was frauds. There are more frauds. I ran out of time and I was getting a bit disinterested by now because I think I've hammered it enough. But I could actually list fraud after fraud after fraud that went into textbooks. Not frauds that they had on the side and then you evaluated them carefully with the scientific process and you tested. No, straight into the textbook. We've got the whale. We've got the... As soon as they could send it out. This was one of the most famous, of course. You'll remember this if you were a little bit older. Do you remember when they said they've got life in a test tube? Can you remember? Some of the older people? Don't you remember when it was told all over? They've done the experiments, there's lightning, they've got the soil, they've created an environment just like it would have been back in the past, and they've done things, and now we've got, by the way, it was virtual mud, useless, but they had this stuff that had some amino acids in it. We are on the verge of life. It was nonsense. But it was into the textbooks. Why I'm saying this is a very influential diagram. You've got the scientists, you've got the test tubes, you've got the concept. Then your teacher begins teaching you it's actually okay. This is correct. We're on the verge of it. We're on the verge of nothing. They were going to get life from non-life. That was the goal. The goal of the experiment was to prove you could get life from non-life. Big Bang, multiverses, string theories, dark matter, you name it. We can be confused out of our brains by the mathematics, but it is smoke and mirrors. They're sincere. You can't knock the sincerity of Hawkins and others doing massive, but it's totally speculative theories, unproven. It's not science. If you have a theory, you're an idiot. If they have a theory, they're clever. When this is disinformation, is that if you do your homework, you'd see those things I listed in that box are already being portrayed as evidences that refute a creator. You know, instead of saying the odds from Genesis 1:1 last week, the odds of it being by chance are 1 chance in 10 to the power of 30, I can't remember the exact numbers, times what? Times 10 to the power of another number, 130. Okay, so how big is this number? What it means is if you took every atom in the universe and attributed a 0 to it, the zeros wouldn't be long enough to be the chances against you. In other words, to put it, one way I heard it expressed was like this. For the theory of the chance evolution to be happening randomly, you would need to throw a dart at our entire universe, and somebody has nominated one atom that you don't know about in the entire universe. There's 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the universe, roughly. So you throw in this dart and you're going to hit not just the atom, you're going to hit, they have to break the atoms up because the odds is bigger than 10 to the power of 80. So you've got to hit the right atom and you've got to hit it in the right place, like in hundreds of thousands of parts of that atom you've got to hit, and that dart has to go into that point by luck. Now what I'm saying is, a worldview can get it to where you ignore the ludicrous idea that that could occur in order to come, I need another theory. I need string theory, this theory, dark matter theory, anything to keep what? To keep my worldview going. I need to keep my worldview going. The problem for our children is these people are running, essentially, the education systems. So, is it settled science? No, it's not settled. Dawkins' claims, they are dangerous, actually. And they prevent real science. Saying that anybody that disagrees with them is stupid, ignorant, or insane, or wicked. I disagree. And there are many atheists who would agree with me in disagreeing with Dawkins. That is why many, many, many of our children have turned from God, having gone through the systems, having listened to TV shows, having it continually just placed upon them, the dinosaurs and this and that and the other. And of course there were dinosaurs, but the way it's portrayed in evolutionary materialist terms, that's why it's happening. I just wanted you to be aware of that. Macroevolution is not proven. Secular human anti-theism is coming from where? From Dawkins. No, it's coming from the father of lies, John 8:444. We're losing our youth to anti-theist disinformation. So where does that leave us? Great, hear you. Where does that leave us? This is a part of what I'm saying. If you have grandchildren, or you have children, it is your duty to familiarize yourself a little bit with these. Not that you have to answer all the questions, because you get them to think for themselves. And you go, here's an article, go look at it. Here's an article, go look at it. So you challenge it and get them to, if they love truth, that they will challenge and they will look. Dawkins and co. are trying to shame and force kids into not looking anywhere else. You understand? He said you should be locked up, you're insane. So they're trying to put pressure that your children will not inquire. So while they will inquire, you need to be teaching them to inquire and make their own decisions, having seen all the facts, not just Dawkins' view of the facts. Mostly it's not an argument about certain facts, it's the interpretation of the facts. We do have a document called the Journal of Creation. It's a bit technical. If we really wanted it, you can let me know. If enough of you do, I would buy it and keep it in the library. It's like a quarterly document from scientific progress in the creationist side of things. We need a basic awareness of the issues. If we were to go over the railway lines and talk to a guy from a township, it's different. I can appeal to childlike faith. I can't when someone's been indoctrinated that your childlike faith is stupid. I now need to address him at that level before I bring him back to the faith. Do you understand what I'm saying? If they're rejecting it outright, oh, you're a Bible, you're religious, you're a nut, you know nothing about science, then you're not going to be able to give them the gospel. You're being closed off from helping people, you see. But it's a certain type. But because of where we live and who you are meeting a lot of people that are not that. They're people that are educated and have been miseducated and they don't know it. I'm dealing with one guy, he's an atheist, he's intellectual, he's in his probably early 30s. He is so angry at the God that he doesn't believe exists. It's untrue. He's like spitting fire of this God that he doesn't even believe exists, about morals that he doesn't even believe in. Because remember, if you're an evolutionist, you don't believe that there's such a thing as objective morals. If a group of people want to be headhunting on an island, what right have you got to tell them they're wrong? It's just evolution. What right have you got to tell ISIS that they're doing anything wrong in terms of evolution? What? What are you talking about? No. Well, you've got these guys, ISIS, And they've got their DNA and they've got their power and their whatever. So they go to these people who are weaker and they rape them. That produces children, which is strengthening their DNA. And they kill off those that are not in their DNA pool. Hey, that's perfect evolution, isn't it? That's evolution in action. Yeah, that's what Hitler was trying to do. Seriously, folks, now listen to me. That's what Stalin was trying to do. They believed in evolution. They believed. And I can assure you that the people who are manipulating this world right now, they believe it. They believe they are at the top of the pile because they are evolutionary-wise better than us. They believe it. We've got to wise up. If they don't believe it, then all it means is they're using it because it's convenient for them to go around like ISIS and kill, rape, and do whatever the hell they want. That could be the other motive. Don't forget the consequences for people fooled into believing this stuff. They could end up in hell because of it. And what I love about this is, I just want to encourage you, find out some stuff. You can go on the net, you can go to Creation Ministries, you can ask different inquiries, get with your kids. You're discovering God's creation. Well, Einstein used to just revel in it. He said, he's getting into the mind of God. He's our God, He's our Creator. And we need to do this for the point of view of apologetics to get into evangelizing, but we can also glorify God. I don't know if we could do it one week just to prove my point, but if all we did in one sermon and worship, and if all we did was nothing but acknowledging God as Creator, I'm telling you, you'd walk out of this place on a high. Because it just lifts you, because you know He's the King of Kings, He's the Lord of Lords, He holds us in our hands, He created us, His mind is marvelous to behold. We are created, we are amazing things. And He's done all this, and He didn't need to do it. He came from where He was and He created this. And we're in there, we're in that plan. Thank you, Lord. And by the way, I was your enemy while you were doing it for me. Yeah, try it. So in the long run, I honestly believe in the long run, you see, even with atheists, there are certain atheists that are not the anti-theists, and they will look and they will go, you know what, I'm not a Christian, but I'm going to have to agree with that point. It is true. The odds are that it was design. And I'm telling you, my dear friends, some good news. There are many, many top-ranked quantum physicists, more and more of them, and people in the field of DNA, in the down at the very, very minute molecular biology, that are turning to God from what they're seeing. He's a great God. They can only deny Him so long. As the knowledge increases, they're going to have to say, you know what, I've seen my Maker, I've seen His mind, He exists. Whether they'll become a Christian is another different thing.